What is victim shaming? A victim is somebody who, through no fault of their own, is being harmed by someone or something and does not bear responsibility for that. So, when a victim who often suffers in isolation, suffers in silence, maybe for a long time, finally reaches out for help and risks sharing about their circumstance, and the person that they're telling that to victim shames, it just absolutely is devastating. Makes them want to just curl up and go back and bear it some more and never reach out again. It just reaffirms everything probably the abuser or the perpetrator has been telling them, that it's their fault and they deserve it. So what does victim shaming do? Well, first of all, victim shaming overestimates the fault of the victim completely and underestimates the fault of the perpetrator. And I'm not saying the victim is at fault. I'm saying that it puts all of that emphasis on what the victim could have done to cause it, and none of it on the perpetrator, or almost nothing on the perpetrator. So it focuses on what appears to be, or what you are presuming is, the fault of the victim. Second thing is, it disbelieves the victim's account of the mistreatment, and it either makes excuses or minimizes the seriousness. So, well, it's not that bad, and well, everybody struggles in marriage. Somebody's telling you about their abuse in the marriage, and you're saying things like, well, marriage is hard, and there's always, little wrinkles to iron out, and it takes two to have a problem, and all of the things that you could say that disbelieve the victim's account, to minimize it, make it not that bad, and to kind of normalize it, or make it seem like, well, you've had that too, or everybody has that. It asks leading questions, and in so doing makes it appear that you're suggesting that the victim could have done something to prevent it, and that it's like, well, if it was that bad, why are you still there? Or, why'd you marry him if you knew he had a temper? Or, well, you saw some red flags. How come you still went through with that? Or surely you had to see something, or you had to know something was going on with your child and that step parent. I mean, you should have seen the signs. You saw the depression. I mean, so it's kind of like assuming and suggesting with those leading questions that the person, was to blame. Make statements that it wouldn't happen to you. Well, if I had been there, I would have known better. Or if I had seen that happening in my relationship, if I saw that red flag, I never would have done that. So what you're doing is you're shaming the victim. You're saying, you should have known better. You should have realized it. You should have figured it out. What's wrong with you? Anybody would have figured that out except you, so you kind of maybe deserved it, right? Because you didn't figure it out. You didn't realize it. And it puts the responsibility to fix it on the victim instead of the perpetrator. So it's like, basically, well, if you had spoken up, if you had said something, if you had gone for help earlier, if you had, not overlooked it, if you weren't in denial for so long, if you had left sooner. So, I mean, instead of saying, my gosh, that's awful, that person did that to you and was able to, mistreated you for that long, and did all those things and never lifted a finger, or never tried, or never went to counseling, and you did all this. Oh my gosh. It's like, where is the responsibility when you are bringing up those things on the perpetrator, on the person? Like, how awful is that person would be willing to do that? Like, to put the responsibility where the responsibility lies. And why is it that we victim shame? Why do we do that? The person that is in front of us. Sometimes I think it's because it's uncomfortable to hear, especially if you're not used to hearing dysfunction in relationships and, stories about abuse, and you really don't get it. The person that, that you're talking to doesn't really get it, doesn't really understand, and seeks to put a normal frame or just perspective on this to where it's just kind of fit into their normal experience of things not being that bad. So that's a way to kind of integrate it and make sense of it. And I think that's one reason why they do it. So it's kind of out of ignorance, not really understanding. And the other is maybe it's not politically correct in the church to have these things happening. We have a very inconsistent and not healthy way of looking at abuse in the church and not supporting abuse victims. And by putting abusive marriages and abusive relationships into a normal marriage framework and a normal marriage perspective. Well, it takes two, and there's always, both people have a part. Not true with abuse, not true with a lot of things where people are truly victims. Absolutely not true. You don't put the responsibility on the victim, you put the responsibility on the perpetrator. So just ignorance, misunderstanding, being naive, trying to put a normal framework on it, misunderstanding scripture, misunderstanding the dynamics of difficult relationships, not really understanding empathy and how to be empathetic, trying to make it okay when we're talking to somebody, trying to kind of make that we're uncomfortable with their feelings. And so we want to just kind of push them down and, oh, it's not that bad. And okay, let's just trust God and let's just pray for your marriage. Let's just pray for the person. And we'll just, I know we'll pray that you can forgive them. Just forgive them. It's like we have to say something a lot of times in the church. And so we just pull out the scripture that we think applies. And by doing that, we're actually harming the person and further victimizing them and making it worse and making it less likely that they're going to reach out for help or get help, because that's doing the opposite. It's victim shaming instead of empathizing, validating their pain and giving them resources for what they need, which is what we should be doing. So here's some examples of victim shaming: asking what an abuse victim did to provoke the abuse. Well, did you talk back to him? Did you not do what he asked? Were you sarcastic? Did you spout off to him? Did you disrespect him? Wondering what a rape victim was wearing. Well, what were you wearing? That doesn't give somebody permission to rape you. If you're wearing something that somebody decides is not modest enough, that's not an okay to go rape somebody. So that's a question that should not be asked. Asking why an abuse victim would stay in the relationship for so long if it was so bad. Pure ignorance of abuse. The more abusive it is, the longer you stay, the harder it is to get out. If abuse is normalized to you because you grew up in an abusive household, you were abused, you saw your mother abused, you're predisposed to go towards abuse and to stay in abuse because it's what you do. In fact, the church makes staying in abuse the right thing to do and doesn't give abuse victims permission to leave a marriage. There's not a lot of support for that, which is getting better. But so that's victim shaming. Why'd you stay if it was so bad? That's discounting. I don't believe that it was that bad or you wouldn't have stayed. No, that's not understanding abuse and what it is to be a victim of abuse. Suggesting that a parent of a kidnapped child didn't watch that child closely. Did you take your eyes off of them? Were you distracted by what you were doing in the store? Oh my, imagine asking a parent that, and the parent is already heaping all kinds of blame and responsibility on themselves, and it's just got to figure out how to not just drown with that, and asking that would be very insensitive. Hearing a wife disclose discovery of an affair and asking her, well, did you give him enough sex? Insinuating that if you don't give him enough sex, that has an excuse to go have an affair. No, not an excuse. No, not okay under no circumstance. Or telling a person in a relationship with an addict that, if you'd set boundaries early, the addiction wouldn't probably have progressed so far. Again, the person that's in a relationship with an addict doesn't have any control over addiction from the beginning to the end. There is no control. So it's basically saying, it's your fault. So there should be no place for victim shaming. That is just ignorance and heaping pain upon pain, and not the kind of empathy that we need to be able to have. We need to a better understanding of the dynamics of dysfunctional relationships and problems, so that we don't do that, especially when vulnerable, hurting people come to us for help. So victim shaming points a finger at the victim or the person that is struggling with the pain of somebody else's choices and problems, and takes the responsibility off of the perpetrator. And all it does is cause the victim more shame and cause them to withdraw and isolate even more, and in fact can even be what's referred to by Annette Altman's of the Men Project as double abuse. It's basically turning around and abusing the victim a second time by discounting and disbelieving what the victim is going through. I have a video on that if you want to watch that. So we will need to be sensitive to the needs of those that come to us and share their pain with us, and listen and be willing to hear and feel what it is that they're going through, and be very careful to not point fingers and try to understand. Job 16:1-5, Job went through this. His friends did a lot of victim shaming. Then Job replied, I have heard many things like these. You are miserable comforters, all of you. Will your long-winded speeches never end? What ails you would keep you, what ails you that you keep on arguing? I also could speak like you if you were in my place. I could make fine speeches against you and shake my head at you, but my mouth would encourage you. My comfort from my lips would bring you relief. So Job was saying, hey, I could do that to you, but I wouldn't. I would comfort you, and I would help bring you relief. Romans 12:15-16 says, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn, live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. And 2 Corinthians 13:10, Paul said, this is why I write these things when I am absent, that when I come, I may not have to be harsh in the use of authority, the authority the Lord gave me for building you up, not for tearing you down. Oh, those are all really powerful scriptures. Even if you are in a place of authority, you don't want to use that authority to tear people down when they are hurting and when they are vulnerable, and even when they are sharing things with you that they have done wrong. When we're talking about victims, they haven't done anything to deserve that. So I hope this has helped you. And there's all kinds of tips on my website, Change My Relationship for You and Your Difficult Relationships, and applying scriptures to them. And my devotional 365 daily devotions for Christians in difficult relationships is full of that. So please check out my resources and my classes that I teach. So much there for you. I want to come beside you and equip you to deal with your difficult relationships in a way that strengthens you and not tears you down. Okay, God bless you. Thank you for watching.